Commander Zethka stared at the dark screen before him, watching the endless void of space through the observation deck of Station Kalar 7. The massive structure hung in the emptiness between star systems, one of the few remaining outposts that still bothered to watch the dead regions of space. Most of his people had given up on exploration centuries ago. The Kethvar had once been explorers. Their ships had sailed between the stars with hope and wonder, seeking new worlds and new civilizations. That was before they learned what lived in the darkness, before they discovered that some places in the galaxy were better left alone. "Another ghost signal, Commander," reported sensor operator Velth from her station. Her voice carried the same tired resignation that had become common among their kind. "Sector 7742. Looks like another old automated probe finally dying." Zethka nodded without much interest. Ghost signals were common in this part of space. Ancient machines from dead civilizations would sometimes sputter to life one last time, before going silent forever. The galaxy was full of such reminders of failed ambitions. "Mark it in the log and move on," he said, turning back to his view of the stars. Each point of light out there represented a system that someone had tried to explore. Most of those someones were now extinct. The Kethvar had learned their lesson the hard way. Their grand expansion had lasted 3,000 years before reality crushed their dreams. Worlds that seemed perfect would turn deadly without warning. Space itself seemed to fight against anyone who dared to venture too far from home. Ancient horrors slept in the void, and it was better not to wake them. Now they stayed close to their home worlds, maintaining only a few monitoring stations like this one. They watched the galaxy die slowly, system by system, as other species learned the same hard truths. "Commander," Velth called again, her voice different this time. There was something in her tone that made Zethka turn around. "This signal, it's not a ghost." "What do you mean?" "It's organized. Systematic. Someone is actively scanning that sector." Zethka moved to her station, looking at the data scrolling across her screens. The patterns were clear and deliberate. This wasn't random noise from a dying machine. Someone was exploring out there. "That's impossible," he said. "No one has been in that sector for over 2,000 years. The Yandi tried to settle there and lost 3 colony ships. Even the automated probe stopped working after a few months." "The signal is definitely artificial," Velth insisted. "And it's moving in a search pattern. Someone is mapping that region." Zethka felt a chill run through his body. In all his years of service, he had never seen active exploration signals from the dead zones. No species was foolish enough to venture into those cursed regions anymore. Could it be pirates? He asked, though he knew the answer. Pirates were scavengers who stayed close to established trade routes. They would never risk the deep void. "No, sir. The pattern is too methodical. This is scientific exploration." The implications hit Zethka like a physical blow. If someone was actively exploring the dead zones, they were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. History suggested the latter. "Get me a direct link to High Command," he ordered. "Priority 1. While Velth established the connection, Zethka studied the data more carefully. The exploration pattern covered multiple star systems, all of them, marked as hazardous or impossible in the Kethvar databases. Whoever was out there was not just exploring one world, but conducting a systematic survey of an entire region. The communication link crackled to life, and the stern face of Admiral Krathvin appeared on the screen. The old warrior looked tired, as they all did these days. "What is it, Commander?" "Sir, we're detecting active exploration in Sector 7742. Someone is conducting systematic scans of multiple systems in the region." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but Zethka could see the concern in his eyes. "Confirmed?" "Yes, sir. The patterns are deliberate and organized. This isn't random activity." There was a long pause as the Admiral processed this information. Finally, he spoke again. "Any identification of the source?" "Not yet, sir. We're trying to trace the signals, but they're using technology we don't recognize." Unknown technology. Conducting exploration in dead space, the Admiral muttered. Either we're dealing with something very old that's just waking up, or something very new that doesn't know any better. Should we investigate, sir? Another pause. The Admiral's face showed the internal struggle that all their people faced these days. The desire to know fought against the wisdom of survival. Maintain observation only, he finally decided. Do not approach or attempt contact. If this is some ancient automated system finally activating, we don't want to trigger it. If it's something else. He didn't finish the sentence, but Zethka understood. If it was a new species making the same mistakes the Kethvar had made millennia ago, they would learn soon enough why the galaxy had grown quiet. Over the following days, the signals continued. Velth tracked them carefully, mapping their movement through space. The exploration was methodical and thorough, covering systems that the Kethvar had marked as too dangerous to approach. They're not just scanning, Velth reported during one of their regular briefings. I'm detecting terraforming signatures. Terraforming? Zethka couldn't hide his surprise. Someone is actually trying to settle those worlds? It appears so, sir. The energy patterns match standard atmospheric processors, but the technology seems more advanced than anything in our databases. Zethka felt a mixture of admiration and pity for whoever was out there. They were brave enough to attempt what? No one had dared for centuries, but they were also walking into a trap that had claimed countless civilizations before them. Any response from the local environment? He asked. That's the strange part, sir. The worlds aren't fighting back. The terraforming appears to be succeeding. This was impossible. Those systems had been marked as hostile for good reason. The Yandi colony ships that had tried to settle there had been destroyed by environmental hazards that seemed almost intelligent in their malevolence. Automated systems would fail without explanation. Even heavily shielded survey ships would develop mysterious technical problems that forced them to retreat. Keep monitoring, Zethka ordered, and send daily reports to High Command. As the weeks passed, the impossible continued. The unknown explorers not only survived in the dead zones, but thrived. Their terraforming operations expanded to multiple worlds. Energy signatures suggested the establishment of permanent settlements. Zethka found himself checking the reports obsessively. Part of him hoped these mysterious explorers would succeed. It had been so long since anyone had shown such optimism about the galaxy's possibilities. But experience told him that their success was temporary. Something would go wrong. Something always went wrong. The galaxy had taught them all to expect failure. It had been safer to give up than to keep trying and losing everything. These newcomers would learn that lesson soon enough. But as the monitoring continued, Zethka began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone had found a way to succeed where everyone else had failed. The thought both terrified and excited him. In the depths of space, something was changing. For the first time in centuries, someone was pushing back against the darkness that had claimed so much of the galaxy. Whether that was wisdom or folly remained to be seen. The emergency session of the Kethvar High Council had been called at an hour when most civilized beings would be sleeping. Admiral Krathven stood before the assembled leaders, his usual calm demeanor cracked by the weight of what he had to report. The Deep Space Reconnaissance probe returned this morning, he began, activating the holographic display in the center of the chamber. What we found changes everything we thought we knew about the current state of the galaxy. The hologram showed a star system that every council member recognized from their history texts. Kepler 442, marked in their records as Extreme Hazard, Colony Forbidden. 3 Kethvar expeditions had tried to establish settlements there over the centuries. All had failed catastrophically, but the display now showed something impossible. Cities, massive orbital stations, agricultural complexes covering entire continents. The world was not just inhabited but thriving. This must be an error, declared Councillor Threnva, her voice sharp with disbelief. Our records clearly show that system is uninhabitable. The radiation levels alone would kill any known life form within days. The readings are confirmed, Admiral Krathven replied grimly. Multiple independent scans all show the same thing. Someone has not only colonized Kepler 4042, but has turned it into what appears to be a major population center. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Finally, High Counselor Merdon spoke, his ancient voice barely above a whisper. Who? The Admiral manipulated the holographic controls, zooming in on one of the orbital stations. The image resolved to show sleek ships moving between the structures. The design was unlike anything in the Kethvar databases. They call themselves humans, he said. A young species from the outer rim. According to our intelligence, they achieved faster than light. Travel only 300 years ago. 300 years? Counselor Threnva stood from her seat. That's impossible. We've been spacefaring for over 10,000 years, and we learned to avoid those systems after losing millions of lives. That's not all, the Admiral continued, his expression growing darker. Show secondary survey results. The hologram shifted to display a map of local space. Red markers indicated the systems that various species had marked as too dangerous to approach over the millennia. To everyone's shock, nearly half of them now showed signs of human activity. They've colonized the Vorthan Nebula, Admiral Krathven continued. The place where the entire 7th Fleet disappeared without a trace. They've established mining operations in the Shattered Ring, where gravitational anomalies tear ships apart. They've built research stations in the Whisper Zone, where our best scientists claim the laws of physics break down. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Zareth. Are they immune to the hazards that destroyed our expeditions? From what we can determine, they're not immune. They simply adapt. The Admiral paused, struggling to find the right words. Where we encountered deadly radiation, they built better shielding. Where we found hostile environments, they modified themselves and their technology to survive. Where we saw impossible challenges, they saw engineering problems to solve. High Counselor Merdon leaned forward in his chair, his old eyes fixed on the display. Have you made contact? Not yet. Our standing orders have been to observe only. But there have been incidents. What kind of incidents? 3 days ago, one of our scout ships suffered engine failure in the Tehran system. Standard procedure would be to activate the emergency beacon and wait for rescue, knowing that any approach to the nearby worlds would likely be fatal. The Admiral paused, manipulating the controls again. The hologram now showed the sleek form of a human vessel alongside a damaged Kethvar scout ship. The humans detected our distress signal and came to assist. They didn't hesitate to enter a system we've marked as extremely hazardous. They didn't even seem concerned about the danger. What happened? They rescued our crew and towed the damaged ship to safety. No casualties, no complications. The human captain acted like it was routine. The implications of this hit the Council like a physical force. For centuries, they had accepted that certain regions of space were simply too dangerous to approach. The idea that someone could operate in those areas as if they were normal space was revolutionary. There's more, the Admiral continued. Our scouts have observed human vessels making contact with species that have been isolationist for millennia. The Zelthrani emerged from their home system for the first time in 800 years to establish trade with the humans. The Crystal Collective, which hasn't communicated with organic life forms in over 1,000 years, has opened diplomatic channels. Counselor Threnva sank back into her chair. They're changing everything. Yes. The humans aren't just surviving in the galaxy. We've all learned to fear. They're thriving in it. And their success is inspiring other species to try again. High Counselor Merdan was quiet for a long moment, processing the enormity of what he was hearing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of their civilization's history. We gave up, he said simply. After thousands of years of trying and failing, we decided the galaxy was too dangerous. We retreated to our safe worlds and told ourselves we were being wise. You were being wise, Admiral Krathovan replied. Our ancestors died by the millions learning those lessons. But these humans never learned to give up. The hologram now showed images from various human colonies, cities built inside volcanic regions that would kill most species, underwater settlements in oceans of liquid methane, orbital habitats in systems where the star's radiation would sterilize most known life forms. In every image, the humans appeared to be not just surviving but flourishing. Their settlements showed signs of growth and expansion. Their ships moved through space with confidence rather than the careful fear that characterized most species' approach to exploration. "What do we do?" asked Counselor Zareth. The question hung in the air like a challenge. For so long, the Kethvar had defined themselves by their caution, their hard-earned wisdom about the dangers of space. But now they were faced with evidence that their caution might have been excessive. "We have several options," Admiral Krathovan said. "We can continue to observe and hope they don't trigger something that destroys us all. We can make contact and try to warn them about the dangers they're facing. Or we can try to learn from them. If they've found ways to survive in conditions that defeated us, perhaps we've been approaching the problem wrong all along." High Counselor Murdan stood slowly, his ancient joints protesting. "How many of our worlds did we abandon because we deemed them too dangerous?" 17 colonies were evacuated in the last 2,000 years, the Admiral replied. Another 43 potential settlement worlds were marked as too hazardous to attempt. And how many of those worlds would be considered habitable by human standards? The Admiral checked his data. Based on what we've observed, all of them. The silence that followed was profound. Each council member was grappling with the same terrible realization. Their species had spent millennia in retreat, abandoning worlds and opportunities because they seemed too dangerous. But perhaps they had simply lacked the courage and ingenuity to make them work. "The humans have been in space for 3 centuries, High Counselor Murdan said finally. "In that time, they've accomplished what we haven't dared to attempt in 2 millennia. Sir, prepare a diplomatic mission. I want to know how they do it." The news spread through the galaxy's communication networks like wildfire, carried by the few species that still maintained long-range contact with each other. Within weeks, every major civilization had received the same impossible reports. A young species was not only surviving in the galaxy's most dangerous regions, but actively thriving there. On the homeworld of the Vorthak Collective, Chief Researcher Quintel stood before the Council of Minds, struggling to convince her peers of what she had discovered through their deep space monitoring arrays. "The data is undeniable," she insisted, projecting holographic images of human settlements across multiple systems. "These beings have established permanent colonies in regions we've classified as uninhabitable for over 5,000 years. Elder Mind Korvash vibrated with skepticism, his crystalline form pulsing with doubt. "The Vorthak have cataloged every form of life in this galaxy. We know the limits of biological adaptation. What you describe is impossible." "Then how do you explain this?" Quintel manipulated the display to show a human city built directly into the side of an active volcano on Pyros Prime. "Our records show that world has surface temperatures exceeding 200 degrees Celsius. The atmospheric pressure would crush most species. Yet they've not only survived, but built a thriving metropolis." The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Vorthak prided themselves on being the galaxy's foremost experts on planetary habitability. Their computers had calculated the exact conditions required for life to flourish. According to their models, most of the worlds these humans had settled should be barren wastelands. "There must be an error in the data," Elder Mind Thekran suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "I've verified the readings 17 times, Quintel replied. "I've also detected something else. energy signatures consistent with terraforming technology, but far more advanced than anything in our databases. They're not just adapting to hostile environments, they're changing them. Meanwhile, in the war rooms of the Draken Empire, General Scarthul studied similar reports with growing concern. The Draken had built their civilization on military might and territorial expansion, but even they had learned to respect the galaxy's forbidden zones. "How many ships do they have?" he demanded from his intelligence officers. "Conservative estimates suggest several thousand vessels," replied Commander Vextar. "But their technology is unlike anything we've encountered. Their ships are smaller than ours, but appear to be more versatile. Weapons? Unknown. We've observed defensive systems during their rescue operations, but no evidence of large-scale weaponry. They seem to focus more on exploration and construction than military might." "General," Scarthul growled in frustration, "the Draken understood conquest and warfare. A species that expanded through science and adaptation rather than force was something entirely foreign to their experience. Could they be a threat?" "Not in the traditional sense," Commander Vextar admitted. "But their rapid expansion is destabilizing the balance of power. Other species are beginning to emerge from isolation because of their success. This was what truly worried the Draken leadership. For centuries, the galaxy's various species had maintained a careful equilibrium based on mutual fear and isolation. Each civilization stayed close to home, avoiding conflict through avoidance. But the humans were changing that equation. In the deepest regions of space, the ethereals stirred from their long meditation. These ancient beings had withdrawn from galactic affairs over 1,000 years ago, deciding that the younger species were too dangerous and chaotic to interact with safely. They had watched civilizations rise and fall from their hidden sanctuaries, emerging only rarely when the balance of the galaxy was threatened. Now their sensors detected something that had not existed for millennia: genuine optimism spreading through the stars. The ethereal known as Whisper of Stars convened with its fellow ancients in the realm between dimensions where physical form had little meaning. "The young ones are awakening," it communicated through pure thought. "The fear that has kept them dormant is fading." "Dangerous," responded Echo of Void. "The last time species expanded with such confidence, the dark time followed. Billions died before equilibrium was restored. But observe how they expand," Whisper of Stars countered, sharing its observations of human activities. "Not through conquest or consumption, but through adaptation and creation. They turn dead worlds into gardens. They make impossible places livable." Still dangerous. Success breeds ambition. Ambition breeds conflict. Yet even as they debated, the ethereals found themselves intrigued by these creatures who approached the galaxy's challenges with such persistent hope. It had been so long since they had encountered a species that viewed obstacles as puzzles to solve rather than barriers to avoid. Back in Kethvar space, Admiral Krathvin received reports from across the galaxy as other species began reacting to the human expansion. Some were suspicious. Others were afraid, but many were starting to reconsider their own isolation policies. "The Zelthrani have reactivated their colonial development program," his aide reported. "They're planning to attempt settlement of 3 worlds they abandoned 500 years ago. The Crystalline Collective has begun expanding their trade. Networks for the first time in 8 centuries, came another report. Even the hive mind clusters are showing increased activity. They've started exploring systems adjacent to human space." Admiral Krathvin nodded grimly. The humans were doing more than just surviving in hostile space. They were inspiring other species to try again. The psychological impact was spreading like a chain reaction across the galaxy. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from one of the human colonies. They're responding to our diplomatic overture." The message appeared on the main screen, showing a human female in what appeared to be a simple uniform. Behind her, through a window, A stunning vista showed floating cities above the clouds of a gas giant that the Kethvar had marked as completely uninhabitable. "This is Director Sarah Chen of New Horizon Colony," the human said with a warm smile. "We received your request for a diplomatic meeting, and we'd be honored to host your delegation. We've been hoping to meet our neighbors." The casual confidence in her voice was remarkable. She spoke as if establishing colonies in impossible places was the most natural thing in the world. There was no trace of the careful fear that characterized most species' communications in deep space. "We've prepared detailed reports on our settlement techniques and adaptation technologies," she continued. "We'd be happy to share our methods with anyone interested in expanding their own territorial range. We believe there's room for everyone in this galaxy if we just approach the challenges creatively." Admiral Krathven stared at the message in amazement. Not only were the humans successful in their impossible expansion, but they were eager to help others achieve the same success. It was an attitude so foreign to modern galactic thinking that it seemed almost naive. Yet their results spoke for themselves. "Prepare the diplomatic vessel," he ordered, "and send word to the other species monitoring this situation. If the humans are willing to share their methods, this could change everything." As news of the human offer spread, something began to happen that hadn't occurred in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Species that had spent centuries in fearful isolation began reaching out to each other, coordinating their response to this new development. The galaxy was waking up, and for the first time in living memory, the awakening was driven by hope rather than fear. The meeting took place in neutral space, aboard a massive station that had been built by the ancient builders and abandoned for over 3,000 years. Now it hummed with activity as representatives from dozens of species gathered for the first major diplomatic conference in centuries. Director Sarah Chen walked through the station's corridors with the easy confidence that characterized all the humans the other species had encountered. Behind her followed Dr. James Martinez, the chief terraforming engineer, and Captain Lisa Wang, who commanded the human delegation's security detail. "It's incredible," Dr. Martinez whispered as they passed representatives from species that most humans had only read about in theoretical xenobiology textbooks. "Some of these civilizations are older than our entire planet, and they're all here because they want to learn from us," Sarah replied, still amazed by the situation herself. 3 months ago, we thought we were alone in this part of the galaxy." Admiral Krathven met them at the entrance to the main conference hall, his tall, imposing form softened by what humans had learned to recognize as a friendly expression among his people. "Director Chen," he greeted her with a bow that was both formal and respectful. "Thank you for accepting our invitation. Your presence here represents hope for the entire galaxy." "Thank you for inviting us," Sarah replied. "We're excited to meet everyone and share what we've learned." As they entered the hall, conversations in dozens of languages quieted. Representatives from species that had barely communicated with each other in centuries turned to study the humans with intense curiosity. These were the beings who had accomplished the impossible, and everyone wanted to understand how. The first presentation came from Chief Researcher Quintel of the Vorthak Collective. Her crystalline form projected holographic images of various worlds as she spoke in a voice like musical chimes. "The Vorthak have spent 5 millennia cataloging the habitability requirements for known life forms," she began. "According to our calculations, 73% of the worlds you have colonized should be uninhabitable for any carbon-based life form." Dr. Martinez stood to respond, his demeanor calm and friendly. "May I see your data on Kepler 442? The hologram shifted to show detailed atmospheric readings, radiation levels, and gravitational measurements. The numbers painted a picture of a world that should have been instantly lethal to human life. "You're absolutely right," Dr. Martinez said, studying the data. "When our scouts first surveyed Kepler 442, the radiation levels would have killed an unprotected human in about 6 hours. The atmospheric composition was toxic, and the magnetic field fluctuations made electronic equipment unreliable. "Then how did you establish a colony there?" demanded General Scarthul of the Draken Empire. "We changed the world to suit us, and we changed ourselves to suit the world," Dr. Martinez replied simply. "The radiation was the biggest problem, so we deployed atmospheric processors that created a protective ozone layer. We introduced engineered bacteria that converted the toxic compounds into breathable gases. For the areas we couldn't fix immediately, we developed improved radiation, shielding, and medical treatments. And the magnetic field fluctuations? We built hardened electronic systems and learned to work with the fluctuations rather than fighting them. Our computers actually use the magnetic variations as an additional power source now." The hall erupted in discussions as species began debating the implications among themselves. The idea of modifying both the environment and themselves to achieve compatibility was revolutionary to civilizations that had always sought perfect worlds rather than improvable ones. Elder Mind Korvash of the Vorthok pulsed with agitation. "The energy requirements for such modifications must be enormous. How do you power atmospheric processors on such a scale?" "Solar collection, geothermal tapping, and fusion reactors," Captain Wang answered. "We've also learned to use environmental hazards as energy sources. Those radiation storms on Kepler 442, we built collection arrays that convert them directly into power." "You turn the dangers into advantages," whispered the ethereal representative, its form barely visible as a shimmering distortion in the air. "Exactly," Sarah said, warming to the subject. "We've found that most hostile environments aren't really hostile. They're just different. Instead of avoiding the challenges, we study them until we understand how to work with them." She gestured, and the display showed images from various human colonies. Cities that floated in the upper atmospheres of gas giants, harvesting chemicals from the storm systems. Underwater settlements that used the pressure of ocean depths to power massive industrial complexes. Mining operations that worked inside. Asteroid fields using the chaotic gravity to help process materials. "Every problem is an opportunity if you approach it right," Dr. Martinez added. "Extreme cold? We build geothermal systems. Extreme heat? We develop better cooling and learn to use the thermal energy. Toxic atmosphere? We engineer organisms that can process the toxins into useful materials." "But the risks," protested Admiral Krathven. "Our ancestors lost millions of lives learning why these environments are dangerous." "So did ours," Sarah admitted. "We've lost colonies too. We've had failures and disasters. But we learned from each one and tried again with better methods." "You don't give up," observed the ethereal. "Why would we?" Sarah asked, genuinely puzzled. "Just because something is difficult doesn't mean it's impossible. Our species spent thousands of years learning to live in every environment on our home planet. Deserts, frozen wastelands, mountain peaks, ocean depths. We found ways to thrive in all of them. Space is just a bigger challenge." The implications of this philosophy began to sink in among the assembled representatives. For centuries, their civilizations had been defined by their limitations, by the recognition of what they couldn't do. The humans seemed to operate on the assumption that any limitation could eventually be overcome. "We would like to request technical assistance," announced Elder Mind Thekran of the Vorthok. "There are 17 worlds in our territory that we abandoned due to environmental hazards. Perhaps they could be made habitable using your methods." "We'd be happy to help," Dr. Martinez replied immediately. "In exchange, we'd love to learn from your experience in atmospheric analysis. Your models could help us understand environments before we try to modify them." Similar requests began flowing from around the hall. The Draken wanted to learn about human mining techniques for asteroid fields. The Crystalline Collective was interested in underwater construction methods. Even the mysterious ethereals inquired about human approaches to energy collection from dangerous phenomena. "This is unprecedented," Admiral Crathvin murmured to his aide. "Species that haven't cooperated in millennia are suddenly eager to share knowledge and resources." But not everyone was pleased with these developments. In the back of the hall, representatives from several isolationist factions watched the proceedings with growing alarm. "This is dangerous," hissed Ambassador Krelvin of the Silence Keepers, a coalition of species that believed the galaxy's dormant state was a necessary safety measure. "These humans are encouraging expansion into regions that were left empty for good reasons. They're disturbing balances that have kept the galaxy stable for centuries," agreed his colleague from the Static Worlds Alliance. "Their reckless optimism will wake things that should remain sleeping." As if in response to their concerns, the station's long-range sensors began detecting unusual activity in several remote sectors. Ancient automated systems that had been dormant for millennia were suddenly showing signs of activation. Deep space monitoring stations reported energy signatures from regions that had been silent since before recorded galactic history. "Director Chen," Admiral Crathvin called urgently. "We need to discuss something privately." As the human delegation was led to a secure briefing room, they remained unaware that their success was beginning to attract attention from things far older and more dangerous than any of the species they had just met. The galaxy was indeed awakening, and not all of its inhabitants had been sleeping peacefully. The emergency session convened 3 days after the diplomatic conference ended, but by then it was already too late to stop what had been set in motion. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy as species that had remained dormant for centuries suddenly began expanding with renewed vigor. Director Sarah Chen stood in the command center of New Horizon Colony, watching the cascade of activity on the galactic display with a mixture of pride and growing concern. What had started as simple cooperation between civilizations was rapidly becoming something much larger and more complex. "The Kethvar have reactivated their entire colonial fleet," reported Captain Wang, reading from the steady stream of intelligence updates. 17 ships launched yesterday toward systems they abandoned over 1,000 years ago. "The Vorthak Collective has begun construction on 12 new research stations," added Dr. Martinez. "They're using our atmospheric modification techniques to study worlds they previously considered impossible." "Even the Crystalline Collective is expanding," Sarah noted, pointing to energy signatures on the display. "They're establishing new mining operations in 3 different systems." The transformation was remarkable. In just 3 months, the galaxy had gone from a collection of isolated, fearful civilizations to a bustling network of expanding species, eager to reclaim what they had lost to caution and despair. But the expansion was triggering responses from things that had been waiting in the darkness between stars. Admiral Crathvin's worried face appeared on the communication screen, his expression grave with the weight of new discoveries. "Director Chen, we need to discuss what our expansion has awakened," he said without preamble. "Our deep space monitors have detected massive energy signatures moving through the void. Ancient structures that have been dormant for millions of years are suddenly active." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "What kind of structures?" "We don't know. They predate any known civilization by eons, but they're responding to the increased activity in the galaxy. Whatever they are, they've been sleeping in the spaces between inhabited systems, and our expansion is waking them up." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The galaxy's age of isolation hadn't been driven entirely by fear and failure. It had been a survival strategy, a way to avoid attracting the attention of something vast and ancient that lurked in the cosmic depths. "How dangerous are they?" she asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Unknown. But the energy readings suggest they're larger than anything we've ever built. Some of the structures appear to be the size of small moons. Dr. Martinez looked up from his calculations, his face pale. "If they've been dormant for millions of years and they're waking up now, it means they respond to galactic activity levels. The more we expand, the more active they become." You're saying our success has doomed us all? Captain Wong asked grimly. Not doomed, Sarah said firmly, though her voice carried less confidence than usual. Challenged. This is just a bigger problem to solve. But even as she spoke, reports continued arriving that painted an increasingly dire picture. The ancient structures weren't just waking up, they were moving. Massive objects were shifting through space toward the areas of highest galactic activity. Several deep space monitoring stations had gone silent after detecting the approach of something too large to be a ship and too fast to be a natural phenomenon. The ethereal known as Whisper of Stars materialized in the command center without warning, its form more solid than Sarah had ever seen it before. The gardener's return, it said, its voice carrying harmonics of fear that Sarah hadn't thought the ancient beings were capable of experiencing. Gardeners? Ancient caretakers of the galaxy, they maintained balance by pruning civilizations that grew too numerous or too bold. We withdrew from galactic affairs because we recognized their influence in the great extinctions of the past. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. The galaxy's history was littered with the remains of once great civilizations that had simply vanished at the height of their power. Scientists had always assumed they had fallen to war, plague, or natural disaster. But what if they had been systematically eliminated by something that viewed galactic civilization the way a gardener viewed an overgrown hedge? How long do we have? She asked. Unknown. The gardeners work slowly, but they are thorough. They will evaluate the current state of galactic civilization and decide whether it needs to be reduced. Across the galaxy, the species that had so recently celebrated their renewed expansion were beginning to detect the approaching threat. Panic set in among several civilizations as they realized their emergence from isolation had attracted exactly the kind of attention their ancestors had learned to avoid. The Silence Keepers are demanding that all expansion cease immediately, Admiral Krathven reported during an emergency conference call that included representatives from dozens of species. They believe we can still avoid the gardener's attention if we return to our dormant state. It's too late for that, Sarah replied. If these gardeners respond to activity levels, they're already aware that the galaxy has changed. Going back into hiding won't make them forget what they've seen. Then what do you propose? Demanded General Scarthul of the Draken Empire. Sarah looked around at the faces on her screens. Representatives of civilizations that spanned millions of years of history, all looking to the youngest species in the galaxy for answers to a threat older than any of them. We do what humans have always done, she said. We adapt, we learn, we find a way to survive. Against beings that have been pruning galactic civilizations for millions of years? Yes. Every challenge can be overcome if you approach it right. These gardeners are just another hostile environment to adapt to. The response from the other species was mixed. Some, inspired by human optimism, began preparing for resistance or negotiation. Others, terrified by the magnitude of the threat, retreated even further into isolation than before. But it was already too late to change course. The galaxy was awake, expanding, and growing. The ancient gardeners were stirring from their eons-long slumber, and soon they would judge whether the current bloom of galactic civilization needed to be cut back to maintain their vision of cosmic balance. Standing in her command center, watching the energy signatures of impossible ancient structures moving through space toward the inhabited worlds, Sarah Chen felt the weight of her species' impact on the galaxy. Humanity had succeeded in inspiring a galactic renaissance, but they had also awakened something that might destroy everything they had worked to build. The galaxy had given up on expansion and exploration because it had learned, through bitter experience, that such activities attracted the attention of forces beyond comprehension. Now it was too late to go back. The gardeners were coming, and this time, the galaxy's civilizations would have to face them not as isolated, frightened species, but as an awakened galactic community. Whether that would be enough to survive what? was coming remained to be seen. But for the first time in millions of years, the galaxy would not face its ancient caretakers alone. The humans had changed that equation forever. The age of hiding was over. The age of resistance was about to begin.